All right, we're live. How you doing?
I'm great, thank you. How are you doing today, Carson?
I'm doing good. Yeah. What are we talking about today?
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm the Reverend Daisy Maelstrom. We're here to talk about America's descent into fascism and how liberalism itself has been embracing fascism and why that is. So, small talk, mostly, should be nice and chill, I think.
hmm Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and figure out what is fascism to you.
Okay, so the definition of fascism, ooh, I actually have this pulled up. So, give me a second. Got to get out of full screen here. No, this thing likes to be full screen. You know what? That's fine. Oh, there it is. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you
This
know
might
which
actually work better.
dictionary you're
Okay,
looking
so I
at, or
actually this is a Webster. This is Webster, and it's
okay?
fine. It's a starting point.
Yeah.
I'm not a prescriptivist. Essentially, the definition of things is kind of a kind of clinical way to look at it. Usually, comes the definitions come from a class of highly educated people, and the understanding of it is usually a little bit different. It's also how the difference is used in legacy media. So, a lot of the terminology that we use when we talk about theory is a little bit different than how it's talked about when the public hears it. So the understanding of these subjects is different based upon how much education you have in the subject, and that's often a barrier to people having a honest conversation because when I say a thing, it might come across differently as you say the thing, which is one of the reasons we're probably starting like this. So I
Yeah.
believe this is Webster's, but the definition is a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as the fascist, that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition. So this usually comes into loyalty to tribe, ethnic identity, religion, tradition, or in a word, nation itself. That's one of the traditional ways of looking at fascism. The more essential understanding of that person is this very scary ideology, and not that fascism isn't scary. We think of it in this terms of not even really just Mussolini, but in Hitler himself. We see him as the embodiment of fascism. So when we hear the words fascism, what we tend to hear is Nazism.
Hmm.
And there is a slight difference to that in the way the perception of Nazism or fascism itself in our modern understanding and how it is talked about in history and how it's perceived by people who study these things is going to be a little bit different there and a little bit more nuanced and complex. So, fascism isn't just Nazism, it is a variety of other things. There are a lot of books and a lot of people with doctorates that talk about fascism and the descent of it, descent into it. For instance, a professor, I want to say from Yale, who studied fascism has recently fled the country because of his fear of the signs that we're showing of falling into fascist dictatorship.
Hmm. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I'm trying to think of the best route to go with this as far as my questioning. And so a lot of things have overlap. So there will be
Yes.
things that anybody with any label will agree on, and some they won't agree on. Do you think that there is anything
Right.
within fascism that is good?
Well, the tenets of fascism itself don't necessarily lend itself to how the population is. So, for instance, we're a democratic republic, but that is at a level of government that doesn't mean that that's how all of government works. For instance, corporations are inherently fascist. Now, granted, you got to take away the nationalism, but when you look at the way Walmart is run, that is a fascist ideology. It is a top-down ideology. It is very much like, and you hear this in jobs, my way or the highway. We
Mm-hmm.
ourselves are marginalized at the very bottom, what leftists typically call workers. And so when we look at these, which is one of the ways that you could look at fascism very easily in your own life and how that operates, no, absolutely not. Or in the fact that the positives we get out of that fascist system itself do have benefits within our own lives. You will see this as fascism in a larger scale. For instance, one of the things that Hitler did is when they first started taking enemies of the state, they would take their estate and their goods and distribute them among the population simply to make it look like the country was doing better.
Mm.
So that itself first seemed good. Here in this country, the fascist elements, the parts of this country that are definitely what would be considered fascist on a globally scale, and it's not the entire thing or on every level, those things are always bad,
Mm.
as in bad as in how they impact the average American. Now, you're always going to have this top of the population that's unaffected, and those are the people we often see the most represented in legacy media. Our celebrities, the people who work at legacy media, the people who run these companies, political figures are almost without fail not affected by what happens in a fascist society. So we are never going to perceive the encroaching levels of fascism in our country as something bad until it really and seriously impacts us. So fascism itself is always going to be negative as an impact of those people who live on the bottom. And then
Okay.
as things progress to that, you're just going to see it worse trending.
Is there anything that is currently happening within policy or just in general in our country that, not counting the overlap stuff, that you would consider fascist? Like, has anything taken place, like, I don't know, in the past 20 years or has always been here that you would say, we have a democratic republic, but this element is pretty much fascist alone and this should be gone?
Okay, yeah, well, let's just take. There's been a lot of discussion historically, as in recent history, relatively, on whether Trump is an actual fascist or not.
Hmm.
So there are people who have popular opinions about Trump, and he has a lot of popularity. Now, granted, he got less than 50% of the popular vote, despite getting a lot more, but only like two-thirds of available American adults actually ended up voting. And even the people who can legally vote don't represent everybody who can vote. For instance, the millions of people that are in the prison system. So, is Trump a fascist? Well, it seems like he's at least open to the idea or lacks a fundamental understanding of his impact. Now, a lot of this has to do with something we call the Overton window. And this actually has to do with how the shifting is. But when we look at the answer to your question, let's run it beat by beat. Is the America First way of looking at things a populist political philosophy? Yeah, absolutely. He's a populist. Trump is very charismatic. If you don't think Trump is charismatic, it's because his charisma doesn't work on you.
Hmm.
But you cannot argue with the fact that Trump is a populist candidate. Now, does it exalt nation and even race above the individual? Absolutely. They use the word DEI as a replacement for the N word in a lot of places. You know, where they'll just say that is person is DEI, is and that human is DEI. What does that even mean,
Hmm.
right? And it's very, it's very nationalistic. That tribalism, that idea that America first, which is weird if you think about it. A lot of the tariffs and stuff we do, and that is a whole economic conversation. That's weird. Like the idea that we should be trying to take over Greenland or Canada simply because it will benefit our country is weird. It's one of the ways. It's one of the reasons why global leaders literally laugh at us now because the way we're looking at it is ridiculous. What makes it scary is the amount of impact that we have on everybody. So we're talking about one of the other ways that fascism is defined is it's characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and forcible suppression of opposition. Well, secret police are literally snatching American citizens off the street now. And by that, what happens is since we don't want to do due process anymore, which means treating people like they're actual people and putting them through a system and allowing them to defend themselves, is kind of being thrown out the window so that we can just take people off the street for random reasons and put them in an El Salvadorian prison. And
Hmm.
we snatch Americans off the street now because we don't know the difference. We're not running them through that. And then we're taking these people who either have green cards or are American citizens and at least holding them for a while until they can be processed by ICE. So we're actually running into the place where we are definitely suppressing opposition more than we used to. Now, granted, this is a sliding scale. It's taken us a while to get down here, but the part of your question that says, have we always been like this? Yeah, like we got here and immediately started instituting policies that will eventually grow into fascism. A lot of these fascistic ideas came from the American liberal elite a long time ago and was imported into Nazism. Matter of
Hmm.
fact, a lot of the learned class really kind of embraced a lot of these ideas that eventually forced into it. A lot of it came from Mussolini and the Italians, and all this kind of came together. So America has always been in the crazy stewing pot of free ideas that we have, growing this itself. And a lot of it's homegrown, but there's a lot of things that are inherently fascistic about our society, the way we treat minorities, the way that we treat the native peoples of this land. All of this is the foundation for what became fascism eventually, because colonialism, imperialism, even capitalism, all lend itself towards fascistic thoughts. So,
Can I pause
the
you real
way we
quick?
treated people, yeah,
I just so my brain works in a funny way, and as I hear
yeah,
things, I write down notes, and
yeah,
sometimes it'll be where I want to ask you a question on each individual thing you say before we get too far, but it might be a
yeah.
thing
Go
where
for it.
it might be a thing where you go like, oh, that element, it wasn't the important part. So when I ask you any of these questions, you can say like, oh, that part doesn't matter, and skip on to the next. So I'll just go in order here, but you made a comment about the amount of people that voted and how many votes Trump got. And you made a comment about prisoners not voting. And so it just made me curious. Do you personally think prisoners should be able to vote?
I'm an abolitionist. I don't think prisons should exist. And I worked as a correctional officer for 4 years. I was on the gang task force. Granted, this was in
Mhm.
my 20s. I became an abolitionist as I became more educated. You can be in prison for a lot of reasons.
Mhm.
You can go to jail for a lot of reasons. Our prison system is fundamentally broken. Percentage wise, we have more people in prisons than any other country, I want to say, in the history of all humanity.
Mm.
We suppress people, and then those people aren't allowed to participate in the system. And bonus, inmates actually count towards how states are measured when it comes to the electoral college. So, in a way, they not only participate in the republic, it's without their personal involvement. So,
Hmm.
inmates are actually taken advantage of and give more power to southern states, which, of course, the whole electoral college. The reason we started doing it is because they wanted slaves to count towards the population so that they had more voting power. They didn't want to be dominated by Northern. So inmates are another oppressed class. Now,
Wait, wait. Well,
are
let me
there
check
types
something
of,
real quick.
yeah,
Real quick. What's the term that I'm not able to think of for some reason right now? Every 10 years, we do the count to see how many people are
census. I worked for
consent.
the
Yeah.
census.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
That's updated every 10 years, right?
The census runs constantly. We count the people every 10 years.
Okay, but as far as the change of like how many electoral points go for like per state and that kind of thing, does that only is that only an option to change every 10 years?
Oh, so do you mean our
Let's
that I'm
say
not sure
one
on.
tenth of California citizens move out of California. Will it take time for that to be adjusted for how many points they get when it comes to votes?
That one's not something off the top of my head. I wish Google was faster because I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time. I don't want to actually make a confident statement on that because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure.
The reason I bring it up is yeah, it makes me wonder if like it makes sense if they're if okay, so if a prisoner was in jail and couldn't vote, and let's say that they were there for life, I
Yeah,
don't think that person should be tallied as an individual that makes that affects votes. Um,
Yeah.
but if they only change it every 10 years, somebody goes to prison for a year, but they're a citizen of that state. I don't know if it's a huge deal that number changed. But yeah, it's very interesting. I definitely don't think that they should be counted towards that state if they can't vote, unless it's like kind of a short amount of time type that they
Yeah.
can't just update it every time a prisoner goes to jail. So that's very fascinating, though. I really want to look into that.
It's true. Also, the Electoral College shouldn't exist because that also lends itself towards fascism. The unbalanced, like the votes of Californians are worth less than the people who vote in southern states. So if you're in a southern state who has a couple points in your Electoral College, the amount of people in your population that go towards those 2 points, you individually count more towards that than New Yorkers or Californians.
Mm.
So people in leftist states, their individual votes actually matter less than the
Yeah,
individuals who vote in these southern states. So the electoral
gotcha.
college is non-democratic as a system.
Yeah. Do you think that the Electoral College made more sense when each state was almost like its own country, but as we've changed and have made there be more federal power and less state power, that now it makes sense to remove it? And also, do you think that we should just be considered essentially just a country and not basically remove state control? Like, should every
Okay,
state be ran the same?
the history of electoral colleges is funny because it was only invented because of black people. They wanted
Mm,
the slaves to count. The electoral college doesn't have any benefits. It's the reason we talk about the same subjects every single election cycle and not the things that affect more Americans. It's one of the
mm,
reasons we spend so much time talking about corn as fuel, even though that whole thing is also messed up because we don't allow other states to have importance in the conversation because they're not upfront. So our system, as it is, states change their constitution so that they can be upfront in the electoral conversation.
mm-hmm,
So absolutely, states run their local government because it's just more efficient to run things locally.
mm-hmm,
And if everything ran the way that it could, which means more of a democratic process, the people who are closer to the ground have a lot more input and control, then yeah. The problem is as the current system runs, it doesn't do that way. The balance system between states doesn't work that way. The states with the most money tend to be the most liberal outside of like Texas. And I think maybe Florida. Most conservative states take in money from the federal government,
mm,
so they're not even self sufficient. They're not following what their average person tends to believe. I'm like, just take a look at Kentucky. If you go back like 100 years, there were literally people in that part of the world, Appalachia, that were fighting the Pinkertons and their essential living in like company towns. They had to overthrow that. And even those philosophies still exist, they are not represented. So if state governments, which are more of a regional government, were more in alignment with local governments, cities and counties, and those were run by average people, then yeah, you would have a more balanced system. But as it stands, the system is just broken, and I don't even think you can redeem it anymore. Like you have to replace the system and not utilize advances within the system, which is a classic liberal ideology that you can incrementally fix things.
mm. Gotcha. Um, okay, well let's hop back to the prison thing real quick because you made a comment about abolition, and I just want to ask a couple quick questions. We don't have to stay on it too long, although we
Okay.
could. I find it fascinating. Okay, so somebody murders somebody,
Yeah.
um, and what do we do?
Okay. This is kind of terrible. But first, I want to actually talk about the end, and then we'll go back to the beginning.
Yeah, go for it.
If you're a lifer, and I met a lot of lifers, I
Hmm.
met them when they were older. Think about yourself. Are you the same person you were 20 years ago? And once you get to a certain age, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I'm approaching 50. I kind of think the person I was 5 years ago is always an idiot. And every time I get 5 years later, that person's an idiot. I grow. I am a much different person than I was when I was in my 20s. So when we look at ourselves as an evolving person, the same man can never step in the same river twice. Murder at the very end there is a growth process. If I rob a liquor store and shoot the cashier when I'm 23 and then I'm 65, what good is that doing? Who am I
Mhm.
helping? So when we go back to the beginning, obviously murder is bad. We don't want people killing each other, and the causes of murder are varied and widespread, is gun violence and all those things. We obviously remove them from their ability to hurt more people. This is
Mhm.
the inherent idea. Now, granted, police themselves grew out of slave catchers, and the prison systems themselves are a lot of them are run by profit. There isn't really a fair and safe way to take somebody off the streets, put them through the system. So, one of the tenets of liberalism, and one of the ones that most of us can agree on, is the idea that people should have rights. That's what the Bill of Rights is.
Mhm.
So, the Bill of Rights gives you certain rights. The Constitution gives us certain rights. However, the way those rights are treated have kind of been debated within the court system for a really long time. And we've kind of moved away from the basic humanity of it for the loopholes of the legal system. This kind of creates an entire cloud of information that the average individual just can't even navigate. This is also impacted a lot by your economic situation. Public defenders are overworked. They can't devote their time. Prosecutors are often represented by their success rate, their conviction rate. When people run on being like a DA, they run about how many people they convicted. That's insane. What we should care about is how many fair trials we have.
Mhm.
So we know we convict a lot of innocent people. We have DNA evidence, and every once in a while, somebody just goes free. We execute innocent people derived from that very fact. The state is responsible for who we execute. So if we execute a murder, we better be pretty damn sure he did it. And typically, the system probably vets those out. So, from the very base ground of how we arrest people, how they go through the system, the entire jail system, and how fucked up that is, none of it should exist. The actual the treatment of it is something that actually needs to be invented from the bottom up. We need replacement systems as we dismantle old systems.
Mhm.
So every single step of the prison system, the arrest system, even the way we look at rights, needs to eventually be updated to reflect more modern and common sensibilities instead of us kind of approaching it from the way we've always done it is the way it has to be. This
Mhm.
is the fault in the entire system. The system sucks. It's broken. We have
Yeah.
too many inmates. We convict too many innocent people. So the way that we treat offenders, murderers, sexual assault perpetrators, those people need to be taken seriously. Something that I personally dealt with a lot is people who have sexual crimes towards minors. Like that's a complex issue. How do we handle those people? Well, clearly, some of them have mental stuff that they can't get past, and those people
Mhm.
should be kind of excluded, or I don't want to say entirely excluded, but they should be in more controlled environments because perpetrators should never be able to have access or create more victims.
Yeah.
But that isn't a prison. They still get society. They're not men in cages being dehumanized, being told when they can shit, when they can eat. That is
Mhm.
something that is entirely taken away from them. All agency, all humanity. Prisons exist to punish people, but that what good are we doing to anybody except trying to make society and victims feel better? That's not a good way to
Okay.
run society.
Okay. So you want there to be a prison of sorts, just so different from what we have now that you feel like it's worth calling abolition of that.
Well, it's not a prison. It's a difference. It's you want to remove people because society is so broken and there's so much going on that have fundamentally shattered how humans interact with each other. We
Mhm.
are exacerbating or making the system worse, and we are creating individuals who might not even offend otherwise. We
Mhm.
are only when we look at the most extreme examples, there it becomes complicated. I am not educated enough. I am not involved enough in the system. I was just someone who works inside it for a little while and have since read and been educated a little on it. I don't think those solutions exist currently because how are we supposed to know how to fix it until we start trying to fix it?
Yeah.
If you're repairing a broken car and it's been busted forever, but you don't know how to fix it, it is something you need experts on and that you're going to go in and kind of have to figure out. It's a long system, but we need to begin moving towards that system if we ever want to fix the system. So I don't think there's an answer right now. I
Mhm.
just don't think locking up a person in a cage until they die is doing society or individuals any good.
For sure, for sure. And I probably agree with, I would say, at least more than half of what I would assume your thoughts are, based on what I just heard. But I do think it might just be coming down to semantics. But I wouldn't be against, instead of having like prisons like we have now, having areas that are, very nice looking instead of just grim, and having more nature, like, being able to go outside more, and not being in a tiny cage, not everybody being educated, everybody having opportunity for therapy, better options for rehabilitation. This is a topic I haven't really talked about much, and probably get a lot of crap for. But when somebody has a thought that they're attracted to minors, that's something they're born with. They're born with this thing. I mean, there might be a little more to it, but potentially that's just something that they have no control over. They see somebody, they're attracted to them, and hopefully, as many of those people as possible can control that. The people that can't control that, I don't think they need to be punished. I don't think they need to. And I don't think anybody needs to be punished or harmed, but they need to be removed from the ability to do it, like you were saying. And so even if, like, for example, those people outside of that action that they potentially would act upon, probably wouldn't be harmful people. They would be, maybe their actions of harm would be way different than maybe somebody that does like gang violence or something. So you don't have to hide the knives from them. So though some people like that could be put into a facility of sorts that just seems like a really nice house. Everybody can have big screen TVs. Everything is great. But because of their likelihood of actions, they aren't able to enter our society. So they're locked in a sense where they can't come and harm people. And I honestly, this thing I think would be a great thing to give people the opportunity to turn themselves in advance, to say, I'm one of these people that feels this way. I don't want to act upon it. So I want to enter myself into this place and live there and work. And I want there to be an option for me to do a job and make money and have a nice couch I can sit on and watch some good TV. And my family could even, if they want to, come live with me or come visit whenever they want. But and so you have people like that. You have people that have murdered people, or maybe even somebody that recognizes that they want to murder people and they want to be locked up. I don't know if we need to call it prison, but when I think of the idea of there being prison or not prison, it's the idea of, are there people that need to be locked up, people that need to not be allowed to go anywhere? Like right now, I can go down to a park. There might be people that shouldn't be allowed to go down to a park, especially people that have already done those actions. So I just want to make sure that when you say you're a prison abolitionist, you do accept the idea that in your ideal society, there should be people that should be locked up.
Okay, so this is a liberal way of looking at things. I'm not saying it's wrong or it's bad. This is just definitively what it is. We're looking at the end
Mhm.
result. All we're talking about is we have murderers, we have rapists, we have those people, we have child molesters. I'm not a bioessentialist. I don't believe people are born with it. I'm
Okay.
not saying you don't have those inclinations. I'm just saying, what if we had a system? What if there was a society where when we just identify things, we're constantly addressing people's emotional states? We've created an environment where crime doesn't really exist as much because the socioeconomic conditions, which means the lived conditions of the average person, aren't in danger. What gang violence exists if all needs are met? That's driven
Mhm.
by socioeconomic factors, both
Mhm.
external and internally. If we didn't treat the global south as bad as that we do, if we didn't take all their resources and ruin these countries, they would have less crime. There would be less
Mhm.
drugs. The more we fix things, the less crime there is. So we now live in a society, this ideal society. And my ideal society is solar punk. That's a whole other conversation.
Mhm.
You have these inclinations which you're already educated about. You could have a conversation with somebody, what we would now call like a therapist, whatever terminology doesn't matter as much. early on in your life. You don't have the shame involved in it. You don't have the end result yet. What we have is let's just assume it's male based on our current understanding of predators.
Mhm.
And this male person realizes they have what we consider and what is an unethical attraction to younger people. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter whether it comes through biology or just whatever, it doesn't really matter. They could have a shame free conversation where they don't have to
Mhm.
worry about initially being arrested, where they don't initially worry have to be about being labeled. This would allow us to help people before they become offenders. So
Mhm.
all the should and would and ostracization, all of that isn't even in the conversation through the beginning. And by addressing these stuff at a base level, we end up having less people on the end. We do end up with people that I don't know how to handle. Yes, terminology, we might be able to call them prisons. The thing is we don't want people who have created victims to have access to victims. So should they have access to parks? Well, if you have never offended, I don't see what the issue is.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah,
a
well,
difference between thinking and
that part I
action.
only meant that somebody might want to be removed from access to future victims themselves. Like that seems like something. If you had a nice enough facility, we that might be a thing where people that are thinking about and they know that if they're left to their own devices, they will act upon it. They might want to be removed. That's all. That's all I meant by that. I think
Well, okay, I know a
that's a
guy.
yeah.
He's dead now because this was 20 years ago. But there was an elder inmate who was just an elder guy, and he relatively seemed harmless. He was allowed to clean the offices of the people who ran the prison.
Mm.
However, whenever a child would come through that, because there were child access parts, he would throw himself in the closet. But this was because he was a repeat offender and he knew himself. This was an old man who had a long history of being an offender.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way for you to know that you're going to offend. You're
Yeah.
allowed to have bad thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the first part is the things you've been taught. The second part is you. You know, like for instance, when you learn a word is a slur. For instance, I used to have a joke where one of the punchlines was a slur that we use for the Inuit people and the other tribes that live up there. I just stopped using it. Now, does the word still exist in my head? Yes. Does my comedy brain love that hard consonant and know that I can use it to make people laugh? Yes. Do I use it? No.
Mm-hmm.
This runs itself to where if you identify your impulses fairly early on, you can control them. Just how, like a narcissist in treatment, and narcissism is a biological thing that you have no control over, you can learn to not be a narcissist as long as you're in treatment. You can't leave treatment. So
Mm-hmm.
if we look at them the similar to the way we look at other biological things that we consider extreme, like narcissism, you can be in treatment without knowing you're going to offend because right off the bat, you have these impulses, you have these thoughts, you have access to somebody who can talk you through it and be present. This alone, I think, removes a lot of offenders. It's shame free. You don't have to worry about being secluded from society. Now, when we go through all these steps, then we end up with a few that exist, and we have most likely shrank that to the smallest possible number. Then it's not just facilities. It's like they're human. As a human, you inherently deserve good treatment. And by good treatment, I mean you should have access to all the things that everybody else should. You just shouldn't be allowed to hurt people,
Yeah.
because we also want to remove that from everybody's life.
Yeah. I guess
So when
I'm
we
just
get to those
wondering.
people, we kind of give them a place to stay that's normal, but away from their victims after
Yeah.
they've shown that they cannot integrate or operate within society. This is a long
Mhm.
process.
Yeah, and not that it matters, but just curious, would they be locked?
No,
Oh, so what's going to prevent them from potentially getting those new victims that we're wanting to keep them away from? The reason I ask this is because you
yeah,
might have like you could think that like in this society, especially with innovation, so many jobs will be covered by AI that or not necessarily AI, but just well, anyways, the automation is what I was getting at, but that there's so many people that need jobs that instead of a person being locked away because of what they did and what we want to prevent, they always have somebody that's kind of like trailing them in a nice way, where instead of saying we want this sex offender to be locked away until they're rehabilitated. Instead, we're going to have them just constantly monitored until they're rehabilitated. So that's why I wanted to ask, in case you had like an option that, you know, or if there's like some kind of a band on them that if they come in a certain distance of another human, that'll alert authorities or something like that, or maybe that they're not allowed to. So, but I mean, something has to happen, right? Something has to be able to remove them from potential future victims for at least some kind of a while. And also as a deterrence too, for future people to view, if I do this thing that I'm wanting to do, there is an outcome. Because I'm probably like you. I don't agree with not at all.
Deterrence doesn't work. No, we've had studies that just show that deterrence doesn't work. If
whoa, no. Hold on. No. I gotta stop you. There's no way you think that. Now, deterrence might not stop everyone. I'm with you. Knowing you could go to jail for life or be executed might not stop somebody that wants to murder somebody. But you're telling me right now that if it all of a sudden right now became perfectly legal to steal from anywhere, no business could stop you from stealing, and the business just has to decide if they want to keep open or not. You're telling me that if that was announced nationwide, new law, there you cannot get in any legal trouble at all. You don't think that the uptick of stealing would go through the roof?
So this goes back again to liberal thinking. It's very integrated. Why are we trying to fix the system? Remember, I said that the system itself shouldn't exist. Jobs themselves shouldn't exist. The wealth of the nation should exist for everybody. Where's the crime? So nobody's robbing a store if you have everything you need already.
Oh, true. I'm just saying separate.
We need it.
Yeah, I'm saying separate from that.
The end result, we need to replace the system to fix the system. We can't fix it within.
Don't get me wrong. There are probably hypothetical options of what you could do in a society or in the whole on Earth to make it better for everyone, to the point where we would have hardly any crime, the tiniest amount of people in whatever we're calling these prison things.
Right.
I'm with you on that. I'm saying separate from that, just the idea of how the human brain works with deterrence, at least in our society. Today, there has to be somewhat of a deterrence. There are people that aren't being deterred. They're still stealing, they're still murdering and whatever. But you know, if all laws went away right now and we didn't do the other things you're talking about to fix things, that deterrence is currently stopping some people from doing some crazy things right now, right?
There's no way to know the percentages on that, but because the reason
at least one human though?
Right. Maybe, but it wouldn't matter because percentages are very small. This is why I said replacement systems are matter. If we just took away deterrence and we took away everything, well, we know people are going to rob stores because they rob stores, but the reasons why haven't been addressed. So, saying that there's no thing here, taking away all deterrence wouldn't work because people need things. And there is a overlap between people who don't have to steal but are still driven to steal because of the way the system is run, the way we reward wealth. We take away the incentives to be more wealthy. We take away the incentives to not need things. That's how you remove people. Yeah, there's an overlap of people who don't crime. But I tell you what, I don't murder and sexually assault people because there's a deterrent, and most people don't. So that tiny overlap is not enough to excuse the entire system. So you keep the system we have until we don't have that. The switch back away from the way our entire society has moved to the right is the reason we have these problems. So you can't just you can't just take away parts of the system as it is, because it is a very fragile system, and the collapse of the system we have, like if we take away the Democrats, system falls apart. Now, do the Democrats represent the average person? Absolutely not. Not anymore. Doesn't mean there's not Democrats that don't mean well. I think most people mean well when they enter politics and do the best they can. We just know that the system itself creates issues. People have to spend too much time running for re-election, which is ridiculous. They have to fundraise. They don't have the ability to help us. So when we look at the way the system runs, bottom up, that's what creates our problems. So we keep the system we have in place. Because until we replace what's broken, no way of taking apart is ever going to work.
Okay.
It's one of the problems. It takes generations to fix the problems we've created over generations. There's no way for you and I to fix it. We'll be dead before the problem's fixed.
For sure. And I think that'll be fun to go over those ideas at a future time as well. But real quick, I think I prevented you from answering that last element of the prison thing before we hop to the next topic. But you were going to say what you do that isn't locking them up. So we're saying that we're in this ideal society. There's hardly any crimes, but the ones that do happen to happen, we'll stick with the idea of somebody that did sexually assault a minor. I was asking you, like, do we have this facility that's nice and an amazing place to live so it doesn't feel anything like a modern prison, but they're locked up? And you said no. So what's the action taking place to prevent them from getting to a future victim?
Okay, so when I met Governor Kemp Thorne in the prison, who later became, I think, the Interior Secretary, he's originally from Boise, was the mayor of Boise, which is my hometown, which is why I know a lot about him. When he came into the prison and he met me, immediately pitched the idea of giving every single inmate television and free access to cable. Because you know what men like to do? Men talk. Men talk more than women. And everyone loves stories. That's how our society does memories. All of these, of course, are their own subjects. So I would just give dudes nice televisions. And you know what they're not doing? Fucking up that access. This is where you're a deterrent the way the system currently works, because they'll just take these things away. But why? Just give them television. So much of prison is because of what happens in prison, because people are bored. They're bored as fuck. But if you give them access to the amenities of life, video games, all that stuff, they're not causing the problems in the prison. Now, they're humans, so they deserve good things. They should have access to the ability to create value in their lives. They should have access to things like being able to grow food and actually sit in the sunlight. It doesn't matter what they've done. We remove the terrible things in their lives, even if they're terrible, what we would call bad people. But I don't think people are inherently evil, even if you're broken inside and because of whatever reasons. So what I do is I think we treat them like humans in ways they can't hurt people, and then we create solutions. So yeah, we take them out of the prison system and we put them in facilities that aren't as punitive, no matter what they've done. Because the punitive aspect of that isn't helping anyone. So yeah, you take them away, you give them freedom. Now that conversation you were having with about how do we interact then with society, that is a lot of it's seclusion. It's a huge country. You know, there are lots of places within our country that's 40 miles of national forest between there and anywhere else. You know, like, yes, are individuals occasionally going to get away? Probably, but they do that in our current system. People escape prisons and jails all the time. And that's within the system. I know, because that was part of my job. I had a shotgun and 2 electric fences.
I mean, I don't know if there's differences with like jail versus prison, but I looked at the stats recently, and I think in all of the U.S. in the past like 10, maybe 15 years, there's been like 2 prison breaks.
Yeah, they've gotten better at it. We had 9 rolls of razor wire.
Yeah, no, I mean, so that's an interesting idea, having them so far away, or doing like what the Brits did with putting prisoners in Australia before Australia was taken over.
They were looking for solutions. The thing is that this isn't a thing that I'm super highly educated in. I do have like a base to intermediate understanding of it.
Yeah.
But when we're talking solutions, which I love where your head's at on this, is looking for answers and discussing that. The problem is it's difficult to talk about from a leftist perspective, simply because there isn't an answer with the way the system is. It's so fucked up.
Well, and baby steps are always good. I'm with you. Like in the prisons, there are. Let's say that we can ignore the resources that are available. If we had everything available, then yes, everybody should get free education in prison. Everybody should get free forms of therapy. And I'm perfectly fine with everybody getting a TV. Definitely sunlight, sitting in the sun. Amazing. I'm with you on all this stuff. This is all good. I just like to take certain elements and see where foundations are. So that's why I wanted to figure out the lock thing. I like your thoughts, and I think we can definitely talk about that one some more. So would you say that those people that are made to be further away, not locked up, those few that we're down to few, should they get to vote?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Because
that's
the
all I needed.
decisions of the country affect them.
Yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like, and if everyone has equal access to vote, the small amount of offenders don't affect outcomes. If we have a flat
Mhm.
vote to determine who the president is, you can't play politics with it as much. And since our prison system would be drastically reduced, those numbers can't heavily influence outcomes. So the only thing we're doing is
Yeah,
harming individuals and taking away
yeah.
rights. They should have access to that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, and I'm not sure where I fall on that. There's some things that just feel weird, but we shouldn't act upon weird feelings. Like the idea of somebody
That's
murdering
smart.
an innocent person with a gun, being able to vote toward like what gun laws should be in that state or country. Like it feels weird. But at the same time, I I just need to think it over more. Let's move
And
on to
it's all
vote.
hypothetical because it's
Yeah.
nothing that we really approach seriously. So the conversation has never happened. There are people who have talked about it, but all of this is theory. What is theory and application? This is one of the reasons why I don't like labels as much. We use words to codify the chaos of existence. And our understanding of these solutions is going to be predicated on how we view them. So even this conversation is predicated on how English is constructed and how we use it.
Hmm.
So that it's so fundamental. So all of this really does come from some of this really does come from a lot of the problem of how we approach them verbally.
Mm.
So even having the conversation needs to happen before we have any solutions. I don't have them because we don't know them yet, but it's like talking about future math. Like when they were talking about the possibility in astronomy, the idea of lensing and light going around galaxies, which we know exist, was talked about by Einstein. But Einstein didn't have a way to get there, or he would have. So the same
Mm.
thing runs analogous to us. We can't fix the problem because we haven't addressed the issue and had these conversations yet. Should gun violence people who committed gun violence vote on gun violence? Maybe not, but maybe they don't get to vote on that one issue. If it's batched in with everything else, I don't think it harms anything.
Gotcha. Okay. And then votes in general. Do you think everybody should vote? Would you say individuals that just have no interest? Now, obviously, if we change everything and have the ideal society, it might free up
Yeah, that's
people's
so
time.
much of every answer is
Yeah.
fix the whole system by
Yeah.
replacing it.
But with how it is now and just how you perceive people, if there are people that have kind of no interest in learning about politics, do you do you think it's good to encourage people to vote even if they don't know, or
You
would
mean
you?
like compulsory? You're talking about
Yeah.
compulsory voting?
Well, no, no, I'm not. Even just the idea of recommending it, like when people post on like social media, like "Don't forget to vote" or "Go vote," or if you don't vote, then you're a bad person or whatever. Like me personally, I just want to encourage people to be interested in politics. But if they're not interested in politics, I want them to stay far away from the voting booth, whether they would vote the way I would vote or not. I just have no personal interest in trying to get people to vote that have no interest in the topic they're voting on. But I didn't
Totally.
know if you think if
Do
you
you?
would your personal hope be that every adult in the U.S. votes.
Okay, I think this is actually pretty easy. Do you know why the bathroom in homeless treatment shelters and in these terrible places, you know why the bathrooms get all fucked up?
Why?
Because people want control over their environment. And in an unhealthy system, people act in an unhealthy way. The fact that we have homeless
Mm.
people creates the problem. So if your vote actually changed your life, you would be more likely to vote. People
Mm.
vote and it has no outcome. If you are a conservative in a blue state, you're less likely to vote because what are you going to do about it? The same works inversely if people look at it the other way. So if
Mm.
your actual vote made an actual impact in your life and you felt it had value, easy. If what you did had direct input into the way your life is going, you'd be more likely to do it. They were able to raise a lot of the Trump voters because he convinced them that he would make their life better. One of the
Mm.
faults of the Democrats is they blame instead of communicating their answers well. They talk from up here, whereas Trump approached it from down here and was talking at a lot of people on their level. So even if you talk about right and wrong and what you believe, Trump and the Republicans have done a better messaging. Remember, humans think in stories. So if the story was and your understanding was that your vote had impact, you're more likely to be educated. And now education's free. You see how it's a scale. So we fix the issue by making democracy something that people can impact directly, unlike how they do now. This is one of the reasons why focusing on local politics, becoming involved, joining things, this is going to have a much better impact. And once you get involved in that, you're far more likely to vote. So we make people vote, we leverage people into voting by giving them more power. And then once they have that power, the access to voting, they're far more likely to get involved. Whereas now with apathy, people stop voting for Democrats because in 2016, one of the reasons is in 2016, Democrats literally took the populist candidate out of the picture and forced Hillary Clinton on people, someone who was historically unpopular, and then made a lot of arguments that she was qualified. Well, you know what? In a job interview, you don't get the job if they don't like you. I am usually able to get jobs and interviews, not because I'm better than people, but because I have studied and practiced how to be more charismatic in person. So when I work with someone and how to tweak up their resume and interview skills, I basically go over how to be relaxed and confident. What you say is less important than how you say it. So the Democrats took that away. So millennials who were super excited and involved in the political process became more apathetic. And this is something that we have issues with. We are taking things away from people. So the Democrats have been messing up simply because they have been overriding the democratic process, thereby convincing these young, excited, energetic voters not to be involved, which kind of destroys the will of people to care. People thought that Kamala has had a lot of momentum going into the thing, and the liberal sphere was excited about it simply because they were in that, what we all know is kind of an echo chamber and detached from how people are on the bottom rungs.
Gotcha. Would you remove superdelegates right now if you could?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Remember, representative democracy doesn't seem to work. It doesn't work as is currently. Democracy itself is good, and we don't have time for this, but socialism itself is actually an advanced form of democracy. It's just we're not a democratic society, so socialism seems crazy. All socialism is democracy applied to economic values. And since we use these words terrible, like socialism is bad, well, why is socialism bad? Because giving power to the average person affects the system. The people who decide how the system goes are the people in control of the system. You never vote against your own paycheck. So the system is broken fundamentally, and it's always going to come back to this. And people don't vote because there's no power. People stop voting because they've shown that their power has no impact. The average person didn't want Kamala to run, but because of the way the system worked out, they didn't want Biden to run either. We all know these older politicians don't reflect modern viewpoints. Again, another way we take away people's investment.
Now, if you factor in the elements with the superdelegates, when in 2020, when there was, I think there's about 20 maybe plus Democrats running for the primary, did he not get the popular vote within running for the primary?
Who are you talking about?
Biden.
Yeah, of course. Because I
thought you were saying the average person didn't. The average Democrat didn't want Biden.
Not a Democrat. Remember, we're not getting the Democrats to vote. We're getting everyone to vote. This is like thinking inclusively, and the tribalism and the labels. This creates that argument of, like Republicans are good about trying to get Democrats to look evil. We make fun of the Republicans because of how crazy some of them seem. However, all that does is convince the Republicans that they're an in-group. None of this is helpful. We should be talking about, and this is something that we all know, is we should be talking about the issues that impact average person. People voted on the price of groceries. But why are they so high? Because the system is broken. So this, once again, it always comes back to the same thing. We want people to be invested. Well, if people are told they have to vote for Biden, then everybody top to bottom goes, well, yeah. Running against an incumbent is difficult because the system is heavily invested in that person. Statistically, was he likely to win more than someone nobody knew about? Probably. But that's because the way the system is run and giving that person kind of like a pass, he didn't have to discuss average things. They had talking points they stuck with, and they never had a conversation. So if Biden had to prove himself as the best candidate in a fair and equal system where it's like a reset, yeah, he can run off his policies, but we didn't believe his policies were helping people. The Republicans were right. about the fact that people care about if their life is better or worse. Their fundamental misunderstanding of why the system is broken, like people blame the current system on the current president, but we know from numbers that Republicans increase the deficit, Democrats dial it back, and then because it's so bad because it takes so long to turn the economy around, Democrats then get blamed. Now, after so much time, is it the current president's fault that the system is bad? Well, they have an impact on it, but it's not just the president that makes decisions. They just end up the whole buck stops here thing. It is Congress. Congress is what controls the purse strings.
Okay.
Congress is, yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask one more question. I just got a few more minutes left. But
Yeah.
okay, so the people that voted for Trump this time around, they
Yeah.
had expectations. They were convinced by the Republican Party that that Donald Trump was going to give them what they wanted, like you're talking about, lower grocery costs and that kind of thing. At the end of his current term, why do you think they're going to feel how they're going to feel? Like, if somebody
Oh,
said,
you mean
like you wanted a thing, you voted for it, and then you experienced life in the past 4 years. Now I don't have a stance. I actually, you might be bothered by this, and other people might as well. I did not vote this time around, and it's complicated. But I am not a pro-Trump person, but I'm also not like an insanely anti-Trump person. I would never be friends with him. He seems not to. He doesn't seem to be a decent person.
No,
but,
he wouldn't be friends with you. You don't
Fair
even
enough.
have the choice.
Right.
I don't even know if he sees you as human.
But so when I just want to let you know, when I ask this question, it's not because I have a thought on Trump or not, but I am curious what your thought is on, are people being tricked? Are they not getting what they want? If they don't get what they want, why do they feel fine?
Let's stay away from a predictive thing,
Okay.
because the way economics talk, the people in economics talk about it, there's the whole conversation about all of that. But at the end of the day, if in 4 years the economy is better and people are doing better, reasons won't matter as much. They will be justified in how they feel. And if they vote that way again, yeah. Now the Republicans control all three branches of government, so they have a direct impact on how that works. Trump has joked about running for a third term because Trump doesn't care about the Constitution. I know for a fact he's never read it because people who have worked with him says he can't read. So, I mean, granted, it's anecdotal, but people who have left his administration say he can't read. And when you hear him talk about policies, he obviously doesn't understand them. He takes advisors, and then he usually, like Joe Rogan, for the most part, agrees with the person who was most convincing to talk to him last. And then because Trump is a bombastic person, he runs with it. But at the end of the day, to address your question, if the world, or the way that we see it, which is we think we're the world, gets fundamentally better, the Republicans will have had an impact on that. If Republican policy fixes things, yeah. But because the economy slowly turns around, a temporary bonus like the Nazis selling Jewish money and communist money and the gays' money, so they can, and by throwing everyone into prison, it might look better until we see long-term outcomes. Because I don't have a doctorate in the economy, and I don't have full understanding of what it's going to be like in several years. I don't know. But hypothetically, if everything gets better under conservative policies, people are justified in supporting the Republicans. That's just how it's going to be. Argument aside.
How about this then? Let's say that his term was over and all we know about his actions are what we've seen in these past few months. You probably have a long list of things for answering this question, but let's just go with one. If a handful of people were thinking about voting Republican, and let's specify that voting Republican would be getting something similar to Trump. That might not be the case, but or let's imagine Trump didn't have his first term. Let's say Trump was running again, and that was reasonable. What would you point to what would be the first thing you'd point to in what he has done so far when you try to recommend to these people, like, hey, if you're still looking, if you're open-minded, looking to hear ideas on one thing of why you shouldn't vote for him based on what he has done, it is that.
Okay, so real quick, in 2012, I was on Twitter arguing with Trump supporters on how he would never be elected president, and I was wrong. I am not so
Mhm.
confident to know. But if people don't have any knowledge of him and they don't know what he is and they're conservative voters, how am I supposed to have a short conversation about that? What can I
Yeah.
point to? We know historically he's racist. He's been in trouble for it before. He says racist things. But if you don't care about the racism, I can't convince you it's bad. I can't just be like, he's racist. We already know he's racist. If you don't know that, you haven't looked into it or you don't care.
Mhm.
Like the justification of a lot of Americans to vote for him is they feel like he has benefits that outweigh the negatives. These people have already done the math. So the small group of people who are already willing to talk about it have discovered themselves that they don't agree with it and are open to conversation. This very small group of evolving people is going to be relatively easy to open the door for because they'll now be open to the idea that he's racist. But if they don't care that he's racist or don't know or aren't ready to hear about it, it won't matter. So there's nothing I can say to a conservative voter that will change their mind.
Well,
Just like,
let's just go a
yeah,
little. Let's take a minute on that. Um, in the future, we can talk about your thoughts on him being racist. But let's set aside anything that he's ever done in his past that we could view as
so
racist.
he's a
Let's
different person.
Well, no, let's just say like that maybe does exist, maybe doesn't. Can you point to anything policy wise, anything he put in place or tried to put in place, executive orders, anything where you would call an action as president that he's done that was racist?
Yeah, this whole immigration thing is racist. The
Okay.
fact we're snatching people off the street is racist. Now, do you have to have an understanding of racism to know that that's true? Absolutely. And is that a nuanced conversation? Absolutely. But the very fact that he calls people rats, we know historically is racist because we have history. So even if we just talk about that policy and how much the Republicans ran on it, they ran on racism. This backlash, the Tea Party, came from a black man being president. It has been racist from the beginning. Can you accept that? Difficulty. Maybe your preconceptions are different with the way you look at it. But remember, they were hanging effigies of Barack Obama based solely on the fact that he was a black man. It
Mm-hmm.
is difficult for them to know that. So, yes, the very biggest policy that we're running on right now, the unbelievable, what did he say, like 12 to 25 million or whatever illegal immigrants, when he says that most of them are people, perpetrators of violent crime, not true. Immigrants are less likely to commit violent crime than people who were born here. So any
Gotcha.
understanding of the basic stuff is everything he says not real, all based on racism.
Gotcha. And that's referring to undocumented.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Just the fact that he talks about Mexicans and people from other countries like that. We don't talk about the people from Europe who outdid their visa or Elon Musk who broke the rules to become somebody who is considered like we look at him like he's naturalized. He's an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're taking away people's green cards today, people who've gone through the system, and that's because they've been dehumanized. We take people who are not perceived as white and we treat them differently. They're treated
Mm-hmm.
worse. It's legal to actually come to this country because your country sucks, because this
Mm-hmm.
country used to be open to everybody. Those are fairly recent things in this country where we've shut our doors, we've closed our borders. And never mind whether borders should exist or not, all of that is predicated on racism, documented, undocumented.
Mm-hmm.
People should be able to
That
come into a country.
Yeah, that would be an interesting stat. I don't know if the stat exists, but I'd be curious to see it. If undocumented people that are caught for various reasons, if you see how many are caught, and then like if you're a white undocumented person, that the percentage of them sent back to the country they came from is fewer than the percentage of non-white people sent back to their country or something like
Right.
that.
That's why we're shipping people to El Salvador instead of Austria. Because the conversation is just like, if it was more white people, we would talk about it differently because how we talk about white people. Like
Mm-hmm.
if there's a disaster and white people are doing it, we're going to call it looting a lot of the time because of the way that we view like a hurricane destroyed your city. Yeah, take all the food and toilet paper you need. I don't give a fuck. Walmart can get reimbursed from their own insurance. It was going to be ruined anyway, sitting in floodwater. But if it's black people, it's always looting. It doesn't
How,
matter the excuse.
hypothetically, let's say for some weird reason in Canada, all of a sudden more people are illegally coming over from Canada than in Mexico. Let's say in Mexico it just stops for some reason, hardly anybody's coming over, and then we're just, let's say, like, I don't know, a million people next year and the year after that come over from Canada, and they're sneaking in, and they feel like they can't get accepted legally, so they are coming over illegally. Um, if they were deported as much or more, would you then think that maybe it is just immigration in general, or would that not affect your thoughts on it?
That's all foreign policy, but there's so many of these things that branch to a whole conversation. If people are coming here to Canada, why? Why are they coming into Canada? If we
Yeah.
keep making sanctions against the economy there, and let's say they function well, let's say if we cripple them, because Trump wants to just annex it into the United States for resources, something that
Mhm.
fascism definitely thinks we should do. But why? If we break their economy, they're coming in here. And then what's the issue? If global warming destroys the South, which it almost certainly will, people will want to come into the United States and we're going to say no. Well, we're one of the main reasons that their countries like that. If our
Yeah.
policies weren't treating them bad, they wouldn't be coming in. So the way to fix that problem from the way that they view it is to fix our foreign policy. We're not addressing foreign policy.
Yeah, I was
That would
mostly
be
just
the reason. It
commenting.
would still be our fault.
Yeah, I was mostly just commenting on the thought. Like, I'm a type of person that gives people probably way too much of the benefit of the doubt. I don't like to assume many things. So, like, for example, I don't think your thought of immigration policies as being racist, I don't think that's an outrageous assumption. I just personally, I always give people the benefit of the doubt. So that's why I wanted to throw out the idea. Like, I think you're right. We could figure out the underlying problem and figure out why are people immigrating somewhere? What should we do to change that? I mostly just meant the idea of if it was happening from white people and the same amount, the same percentage, or all of them were being deported the same way, would that change the assumption that when it happens with darker skinned people we assumed that was racist, but now that we see that it would happen with anybody, that we just recognize, okay, at least this person or this administration or this set of senators, these ones seem to just be against illegal immigration, not against brown illegal immigration.
Remember, they wouldn't
So
even be having this conversation about brown people if it wasn't something that really started with Nixon and it made worse by Reagan. Remember, even the term marijuana was created to make Mexicans look like worse people because when we wanted to vilify the weed, this is a Nixon thing for sure. He wanted to blame the Jews and the Mexicans and the blacks for it, as he said.
mm,
So, like, that's a direct quote from him. You know what I mean? Like, but that conversation only exists because we wanted to run some politics on racial politics. That whole welfare queen was an invention of Ronald Reagan. That is something he created. So if white people were the issue and white people were doing it, they wouldn't have been running on this for generations. It wouldn't,
mm,
it's not even part of the conversation. Now, would we address why? Probably not as quickly because, but our economy is run on slavery in the global South. You wouldn't have nice things. Even social democracy is predicated on the fact that cultures are paid pennies to make clothing for us. So it doesn't really, like, all of it is so racist that if white people were doing it, we probably, to answer your question, wouldn't care because
interesting.
white people would just, now granted, is it at the point? Yeah, but you look at it, Trump is even, it offered gold carved citizenship where you could just buy into it. That is the very center of a bullseye to the core concept that it's easier access for people. They are going to stop PhD seeking people to come into this country because they're brown, but they 100% will let Germans and people from the UK and the Irish come in to do it. They're never going to write a policy to stop white people from coming in here, no matter how the immigration rate runs, because
Mm,
that's the narrative around it will just be, hey, they're just sending their best. Whereas Trump literally said they're sending their worst.
yeah.
Neither of those things is true. They're sending their poorest because we fucked up their country. We don't do that to Europe. But if we did that to Europe because we're still the only superpower and we're using the Bush doctrine to export our culture into everybody, yeah, they might do that.
You were saying
And
we
then it would
fucked
be
up
a different conversation.
Mexico?
Well, we use that as the example because that's one that Trump usually uses. We fucked
Mhm.
up most of Asia. We have been in a persistent state of colonialism and war. The United States still has colonies. Look how we talk about Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans are Americans. But if you
Yeah.
look at how that place is run, it is run as a debtor's prison with people who can't buy themselves out of it. We
Mm.
loan them money. You know, when global relief efforts come into a country, uh, they destroy the economy by taking away all their stuff. This is something that Trump has openly said about Ukraine, but this is a policy we have used in other countries. We vilify the presidents of oil companies or oil presidents in the South with oil resources because they want to take that oil back to the people where it belongs. For instance, the Congo is the most mineral rich area in the world, but you know who's never going to get it? The people who live in the Congo. We
Mm.
take it. So the way that we run it, we've screwed up basically the planet with our economic policies. Now, can it move away from that? Absolutely, but not with this nationalistic, not with this jingoism, this fascistic way of looking at the world. All of these things, putting America first, is what creates these very issues, including the immigration problem that Republicans like to run on. So yeah,
Gotcha.
will white people be treated like no? Because have we fucked up their countries? No. Brown people done it over and over again, creating the immigration problem we worry about, creating the crime from the border that actually exists. But a lot of people who come in here illegally come in through planes. They don't
Mm.
even come across the border. So like even as we address like wall is already useless. It doesn't even run across the border. It's just performative.
Mm.
It is just politics. None of these things address the actual solution. And that solution exists because of our foreign policy. So, yeah, always systemic. Liana, this is my
Gotcha.
cat, Liana.
Oh, hello. Um, well, that is a good. I was just about to say. I think we're at a good point to pause this one. Hello, kitty. But yeah, it was great talking with you, and hopefully we can set up another talk in the future. And a handful of these things are things that I don't know much about, so I'm glad to hear about them, and then I will look into them, and then next time we talk, I might have some new insights on them. So yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
thanks, Carson.
yeah, thanks for the talk. You have a good one. Okay.
You too.
All
See you
right.
later.
Take care.